It was a quiet start to Algeria's presidential election. On a hot summer's day, just a trickle of people at this polling centre in the capital, Algiers. Those who did turn out to vote believe it's a national duty.
Because I love my country, I'm Algerian, and I hope that everyone will vote.
This is about the future of our children and our grandchildren. Many things will depend on it. Hospitals, universities, purchasing power, the stability of the country.
Opposition leaders had raised concerns about the heat and impact of early polls on mobilizing voters. Unlike the boycotts and political turmoil of 2019, there's political stability and no unrest. The incumbent president insists that a vote for him is a vote for Algeria's prosperity. His critics accuse him of curtailing freedoms and focusing more on perception building than actual reform. But he's widely expected to retain power. His opponents say it's a real fight and their supporters will give the president a tough time. But some parties on the far right and the far left of the political spectrum are still boycotting. Haj Mohammed isn't surprised. All his adult life he hasn't missed voting in an election, whether regional or presidential.
The people against this election, we know who they are. Their thinking is that the incumbent will always win. I'm sure that the elections will succeed 100%. God willing, in the next 5 years, whoever takes power will make a lot of changes for the country within and for its external outlook.
There is enthusiasm amongst the supporters of the three candidates, and there's been a steady trickle of people coming out to vote. But there is also this segment of Algerian society which believes that the results are predetermined and there is no point in voting.
Many young people told us they don't see the appeal in casting their ballots. Turnout is a major issue because without a proper mandate, the incoming president would lack legitimacy.
Of course, elections grant legitimacy and credibility to the president. The larger the turnout and the higher the percentage, the greater the president's freedom to act, and the stronger their legitimacy. This enables them to govern with greater independence.
Without a large turnout, whoever wins will have to work hard to prove they represent the majority of Algerians. Osama bin Javaid, Jazeera, Algiers.
William Lawrence is a professor of international relations at the American University. He's also a former North Africa director at the Crisis Group and joins us live from Washington, D.C. William Lawrence, voter turnout has reached 48%. Last presidential election turnout was 40%. Now, that's not much of an increase. Is that a good or bad turnout for Algeria?
It's a fantastic turnout if it actually happened, but I don't believe it. 5 years ago, you had 33 million people that voted at 5 p.m. And this year you had 26 million people that, let me start again. You had 33% that voted by 5 p.m. and 26% that voted by 5 p.m. And then this time, and then the last election, 39% had voted by the closing. And this time they're saying 48%. So you had a 22% jump. Half of the Algerian voters voted in the last 3 hours before the polls closed. And it's just not believable. I think what's going to happen is they're going to significantly revise downward the participation route because there's no reason half the people voted in the last 3 hours of the elections. You would have had long lines at the polling stations, and we didn't see anything like that. You also would have had a lot of young people voting. And anecdotally, all the reporters and observers going around Algeria are saying none of the young people are voting. And so this is the first time I can remember where the participation rate seems to be made up. Now, if it's 48%, that's a huge jump over the last time. And there need to be a lot of sort of investigations and reporting to see if it was that high. But I really don't believe 12 million Algerians voted yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, as we heard in that report there, not only was it hot weather for many of those, but some of the parties have boycotted this election. What does that tell us about the political landscape of the country or where the opposition is right now when it comes to democracy in Algeria?
So Algeria has a lot of political parties going back to the '88 democratic opening, many dozens, but maybe about a dozen that matter, and only 3 were allowed to participate in this election. One by the president, who isn't even a member of his party anymore, and 2 other large parties were allowed to field candidates. But another 15 candidates were completely excluded from this election, which helped lead to the boycotts. And then, as you know, a lot of Algerians have been boycotting since the 2019 Hirak protests, and they'd like to see a democratic opening. Most Algerians are more concerned about economics than politics, but increasingly Algerians are thinking they're not going to get good economic turnouts without what they call legitimate institutions operating on their behalf. And instead, we've got a situation where, one man pretty much controls the system to a large degree. And you don't get the sense, talking to Algerians, that they feel like the government's opening up, being transparent, and doing the kinds of things that need to be done to spend all the windfall of money they're making from the huge European appetite for Algerian hydrocarbons in the context of the Ukraine war. So Algeria is rich right now, but the citizens aren't really feeling it.
Well, yeah, exactly as you just said there. Economics is probably what's on the mind of Algerians, and certainly Algeria has the 3rd largest economy in Africa. And as you were saying, it's rich in resources. So what are the main issues that your everyday Algerian is facing when it comes to on a day-to-day basis?
They're complaining about high price of food, like everywhere. Tomatoes, sardines, all the staples, couscous that people eat are high prices. Wages have gone up some, but not enough. But I think, when you start talking to Algerians, one of the first things they start talking about is the investment law and foreign investment, because there's very little foreign investment coming into Algeria, despite the changes in the investment climate and the investment law. And that's because foreign investors just haven't seen the types of, major reforms we would need to see for the Algerian economy to open up. Instead, it's very much on this old sort of 1970s, Arab socialist type system where it's very state directed. And, they are concerned about keeping the poor less poor, but there's very little about building a middle class and opening up. So, when I go to Algeria, I go to the business schools, I go to the economists and the professors, they all agree Algeria needs to open up to the world, to Africa, and get the economy going with such a large educated population. And instead, we have a very sort of closed, state-driven economy that doesn't take full advantage of the considerable wealth Algeria has. Everyone agrees on the reforms. They just haven't happened yet.
Right, thanks very much, William Lawrence. There's some interesting stuff. Professor of International Relations at the American University.
Pleasure.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.